I think you can become a Brexiter, Nigel. I think once you vote, but you can become a reformed Remainer.
It's all right. He's having a go at me.
Well, I think, look, I mean, here's the truth of it. I mean, on the one hand, of course, it is not a good thing that tens of millions of people in Europe are not going to get their jabs until several months after people in Britain do. That is not a good thing. But what it has shown is this centralised bureaucracy, and these people like von der Leyen and all these other names you've barely heard of.
Where did she come from?
She was a German defence minister.
They didn't like a very low rating, wasn't she? Second most lowest.
Very low rating indeed. And what I've seen, Ash, over decades is the European Commission. Each country sends a representative. They're not voted for, they're just sent on by their government. And very often the European Commission is a great way of hiding domestic embarrassments.
Yeah.
So, we used to send people like Peter Mandelson after they'd been sacked from cabinet.
Like, what's his name when he went to Hong Kong because he lost his seat as an MP? Became
Chris Patten. Chris Patten. I mean, generally, there's quite a long tradition of people who've somehow failed in the end in domestic politics, finish up in the European Commission. But here's the point. They're the people that make the big decisions that affect the lives of hundreds of millions of people, and you can't vote for them, and you can't sack them, and you can't change the decisions that they make. And I think that was a fact that I've been really banging on about for 20 years. And I think, actually, a lot of people in the last week, both in the UK and around the rest of the EU, where the press are absolutely going to town on the Commission, and I genuinely think that on something as important as this, on the magnitude of this, I really believe this is the beginning of the end of the European Union as we know it.
And Belinda Delucy said that when they came to vote for it, von der Leyen was the only name on the ballot sheet.
Yes, I used to have this argument again and again with Mr. Barroso. When he was, for 10 years, he was the Commission President. And I regularly used to say, Mr. Barroso, no one voted for you. And he'd always heckle and shout. And he always responded his answer, no, Mr. Farage, you're wrong. The European Parliament voted for me. Well, technically we did, but there was only one candidate.
Right, yeah. Unbelievable.
I mean, I was going to say, it beggars belief. I must thank my nanny, my friend Nanny, not my nanny, my friend Nanny, who was the one. I said even Nigel couldn't convince me of this before the referendum, and then she said, "Well, you've got to look at it this way," and she made me realise that, of course, we were living in what was slowly becoming an empire of Europe, and we would have all disappeared.
You should have listened to Nigel though in the first place. And then,
well, yeah, I know, but I should. But I was probably.
I worked on him for years and years. He wasn't
tried.
having it.
I know.
He wasn't having it.
No,
Because he had a house in France.
I know. That was why.
We should be governed by these bureaucrats.
Exactly.
Yeah, but all my friends in France all want to leave the European Union. When I was talking to them about that, they said, no, James, we want le franc back. And all the ordinary people in France are just waiting for someone like you in France, actually, Nigel, to be honest, to set up a party that they can get themselves out.
I think it's the same everywhere. As I say, I think this is the beginning of the end. Brexit and now this is the beginning of the end. And we're going to finish up, I hope, in 5 or 10 years' time, with a European cooperation where we trade together, work together, agree to be friends and partners together, but not one where you surrender national sovereignty and give it to a bunch of losers in Brussels who make terrible decisions. The days of that are long gone.
Well, let me talk about this, and I tweeted about this earlier today because it really annoyed me. I noticed that Sky today, because of the problem with the EU and the Irish border, which was the biggest, basically it's a cock-up beyond belief, wasn't it, by a bunch of people who were useless. But they had this guy up as the EU ambassador to London. Now, I didn't think we had, and we told the EU they're not having an ambassador.
Well, they've got an ambassador. It's just a question of what status we give him and whether we recognise the EU as a country in the same way that we would the United States or Australia. But, yeah, I mean, they have an ambassador. Indeed,
or Italy or France.
Yeah, they have ambassadors all over the world.
Yeah.
They're building their own military. They are I mean, Barroso himself, who was the boss for 10 years, said we are building the first non-imperial empire the world has ever seen. So, that's why they got a flag. That's why they got an anthem. And they want to impose upon people this feeling, this identity of Europeanness. But actually, people will always be French first, European second, German first, European second, and not the other way round.
And we saw that, didn't we, when they all shut their borders? So is it going to fail now, the EU? Is it sort of the beginning of the end? Is that?
I've always thought it would, and I think that the biggest problem they've got is that, for us, Brexit, okay, it was painful. We made it painful because our politicians didn't really believe in it, but at least we weren't in the euro. Breaking free of the European project when you're in their currency, it's not impossible, but it's a much tougher job. So it's going to take a bit of time, but I do think it'll happen. Yeah.
I think Hungary are going to go before long, possibly Poland. Are Poland in the EU? They are.
Holland's not doing well.
Hungary, of course, and Poland recently vetoed the entire EU budget. They're constantly being talked down to by Brussels, being told you can't do this, you can't do that, leading many in Hungary and Poland to say, hang on, isn't this what the Soviet Union was like? Weren't they telling us what we could and couldn't do? And you'll notice that the Hungarians have broken away from the idea that Brussels can provide vaccines, and the Hungarians are out buying their own vaccines. So they've kind of broken ranks already.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I think they're thinking of buying this vaccine from Russia called Sputnik. Now, here's a bit of news. I'm getting my jab on Thursday, that's fine. But if it was we're not taking the Russian, but I'm just saying, if we did have the Russian, I don't know whether I'd want to take it or not, because,
there's a history, isn't there?
A few people have been done with different things.
James? Would you drink a cup of tea given by Mr. Putin?
Yeah, it's the cup of tea after, the tea and biscuits after the injection you've got to be careful of.
No, I think in hindsight, probably not. Probably the injection might be safer. Yeah, but this is just I can't. I've never seen anybody with the title of EU ambassador on a news show before. And
they try and slip it in like the national anthem. They're just without anyone noticing, and hopefully, it just becomes.
Well, no, Sky's going a bit left wing, isn't it? I mean, it's become incredibly sort of wokish, if you like. But I just wondered whether that was them, or whether there is an EU, somebody called the ambassador to the EU. We've always had.
Yeah, they've been there for years, and in fact, we've had EU ambassadors actually in parts of the world replacing British ambassadors. The Foreign Office saw it as a way of saving money, would you believe? And all that it did, in fact, was sort of diminish our influence around the world. But that is behind us, and we're moving forwards. But here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. They're in real trouble. They are 3 months behind us with vaccines, and we have got a surplus, or will have a surplus very shortly, of vaccine. Now, they are clearly desperate, and much as we may not like the European Commission, we like the European people, so we should want to help them, and absolutely Ireland should be the first place that we start. But, Michael Gove was saying, no problem, we'll give the EU vaccine. But I would have thought, actually, what we ought to say to them is this. Now, look, you're messing us around at the border, putting all sorts of stupid red tape in place for shellfish exports and all the rest of it. You behaved terribly over Northern Ireland, where perhaps that agreement and the wording needs looking at. I mean, surely this is a moment we should use leverage. Sure, we'll help you, but what a great time this would be to actually renegotiate some parts of a deal that aren't working very well.
Good idea.
Yeah. What do you think was in the minds of? I'm told that it was Ursula Useless who actually came up with the idea to is it 16, I think.
Article 16.
Article 16
of the Irish Protocol.
She's the one who came up with using that. She took personal control of the situation.
Well, they've been going in that direction, haven't they, for a week? They'd already been saying that, for example, the jabs that are being produced in Belgium for Pfizer, they're saying that vaccine they're threatening can't leave the EU without an export license, without permission. So they'd already been going in that direction. The reason is they're panicking. They're absolutely flapping and panicking because they made it clear. They made it clear at the start of the coronavirus crisis. No. Don't worry your little heads in Paris, in Rome. We're in charge. There are great economies of scale. We're going to sort the whole thing out. And when they realised how far behind Israel, the UK, and America they were, they started panicking, and that was when they decided they'd try and get tough. But I mean, the irony of them trying to put in place a hard border in Ireland, when all the way through the last 4, nearly 5 years, they were saying that was the one thing that they wanted to avoid. Their credibility is zilch.
I mean, it can't go on like this, can it? I mean, we can't retain an ambassador to the Union when we have ambassadors to every individual country within Europe and beyond. Why have we not just asked him to leave?
Well, the government aren't tough enough to do that. And in fact, the odd thing about this government is they've been kind of saying for the last few months, look, the EU's wonderful. We think it's absolutely great. It's just that it doesn't suit us. And I think the moment has come, actually, for Boris Johnson to be a bit bolder and to say, look, we've left this union. It clearly doesn't work. Wouldn't it be better, if France and Germany genuinely had their independence again, and then we could all join together in a European cooperation? But at the minute, they haven't got the courage to do it. They don't want to rock the boat.
I saw Boris saying, it was going to be. He was asked about if it was going to be frictionless before the deal, and he said, "Oh yes, of course it will be totally frictionless." But obviously, it isn't that. Did Boris think it was going to be a different deal to the one he signed up to?
No,
well,
it was just plain politics.
I mean, firstly, on Northern Ireland, he was asked specifically several times, would there be checks in goods going from mainland UK to Northern Ireland, and time and again he said no, and that just was not true. All right, just not true. When it comes to the wider deal, I don't know the answer. Has this deal worked out differently to the way he thought it would, as opposed to what he told us it would be? I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that border police and customs in the Netherlands, in France, are making things wholly and unnecessarily difficult. I mean, they even confiscated a ham sandwich, didn't they?
They threw our ham sandwiches away and they went, hey guys, that's Brexit for you. And threw the things.
They are basically playing silly buggers, making life as difficult as possible to the fury, of those in the shellfish industry and perishable foods. So it's about, as I say, let's use the leverage.
Use this to negotiate a better deal, tweak it.
Yeah,
Why have the Germans decided that they would go and sort out their own COVID vaccine and not been told off by the Union, the European Union?
Well, this is open to interpretation. We know what the Hungarians have done, right? We know the orders that they placed. With the Germans, at the moment, it looks like the Germans are about to break away from the EU. It's by no means certain yet, James, but I think ultimately, Mrs. Merkel's party want to stay in power, and if they're seen not to have acted in the national interest because they're defending this weird structure in Brussels, then they'll be in trouble. So it looks as though they may be breaking away, but it's not certain.
Do you think if Germany broke away from the EU, that would more or less be it, or would we need France to do the same thing?
It would more or less be it. Yes, because the whole thing. France and Germany have been at the heart of this since the late 1950s. They're the ones that have ruled the whole thing. And remember, behind it all, to begin with, was quite a good idea. And that was to stop the German tanks rolling across the Rhine as regularly as they did. 3 times. Well, they weren't tanks.
But we just don't give them any more tanks, that's all.
Yeah, 3 times in 70 years they crossed the Rhine. So the idea, look, the concept that people should want to come together, trade with each other, be friends, not kill each other in their millions, all of that, of course, made total sense. It's what it's turned into that's the nightmare and the problem. It's difficult to predict, but my guess, James, is that actually the country we should be looking at is not France, not Germany. I think it's Italy. And the reason I say that is, firstly, because there has been, zero growth in Italy for 20 years, and that was before the pandemic came along. Why? Because they're stuck in a German-dominated currency that doesn't suit their country at all. And secondly, I do actually think there is something called the Italian temperament.
They got taken over, didn't they, the Italian government?
Well, I mean, their governments, we've actually now had 66 administrations since World War II. Yeah. Ironically, Berlusconi, for all his wildness, actually Berlusconi did bring relative stability to Italy. He had a few parties here and there that people didn't approve of necessarily.
Yeah. Well, he was a sort of Italian Donald Trump, wasn't he, really?
Yes. He was the media mogul who came into politics, didn't care what he thought. But I just think at some point the Italians say, you know what, enough. Yeah. The Greeks got close to it a few years ago. They marched up to the top of the hill, then marched back down again. I think at some point Italy will just say, the euro's killing us, we have to leave.
Yeah. And I think it is the beginning of the end. And I think what would be nice, I suppose, to hope that in the future to go back to what it was always supposed to be, and that was the
EEC,
sort of just the trading bloc, so that we could
with the butter mountains and the cheese mountains.
Well, no, we don't want that again,
we don't want that.
That was what
the
somebody.
Concept.
The
Concept.
The common market,
trade and friendship.
Exactly. Common market.
That's fine. All of that's fine. And I think that's where we'll finish up. I really do. I think it's very important not just to slag the thing off, although I'm rather enjoying it, of course, right at the moment. But it's actually important to put forward positive alternatives.
Yeah. And we should help them with the vaccine if they can't manage it, because, they're the nearest people to us, and we want to be able to move, and they probably want to be able to move from where they are as well.
You must have had a bit of schadenfreude, Nigel, with I mean, not that you feel good about it, but there must have been a bit with all the vaccines and all the other things going on our way.
Hands up, I confess. Yes, of course, because they've been shown up. These people have been shown up what I always knew they were. So there is a certain sense of satisfaction about that, although I'm worried about what they're doing for the safety of their populations,
Yeah. Let me ask you this as well, and I know what you're going to say, but just have a little think before you say it. You see, you're probably the politician who has had more effect on the lives of the people of this country, but never been able to win a seat to get in. Not that you particularly want to sit for Labour or Conservative, and I suppose that's the way you have to do it. With the new Reform Party, who knows at the next election what may or may not happen. But don't you think in some way you should have been offered some sort of honour in the last honours list?
Well, two things to say, James, about that. Number one is, of course, don't forget, I won 2 national elections leading 2 different political parties, something no one's ever done in British history. So I've had a bit of election success, but that is under a proportional election system. When it comes to a first-past-the-post system, it's a very, very different kettle of fish. I mean, 2015, I led UKIP. We got 4 million votes. We got more votes than the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, and Plaid Cymru all added up together. But we won 1 seat. So busting a system that is designed to keep two-party politics going for as long as possible is very, very difficult. In terms of recognition, I think the truth of it is that the Conservatives and Boris Johnson, I think they owe me far too much ever to admit it in public.
Yeah, but I think, a lot of people will feel that they themselves would have felt that if you'd been given an MBE maybe, or a knighthood...
They tried to make him a lord, didn't they? But you didn't want to take it because it would have taken you out of the arena, really, wouldn't it?
There was a time in 2016 when they would have put me in the House of Lords, yes.
To keep you quiet, though, they wanted to do that.
But that would have meant I couldn't come back and fight politically. And I just, 6 months into the May premiership, I just began to feel in my water, they are going to betray this. They're going to make a mess of this. So you could argue, I did have my chance a few years ago. I turned it down. But you know something, James, when it comes to recognition, I get recognition every single day. I get it through emails. I get it when I go and visit the petrol station and buy the newspapers and other essentials. And, just ordinary folk in the street come up and say, oh, I've been with you for 20 years, I agree with you totally. Or they say, actually, Nigel, I was on the other side, but hey, you fought for what you believed in. And I genuinely find on a daily basis ordinary, decent folk going about their lives coming up and saying thank you. And that, I tell you what, you can't ask for a better or nicer recognition than that.
You very seldom get anybody being nasty to you. It's funny how they're quite prepared to do it on social media, but and I'm glad they don't do it, by the way. And if you do, you'll get dealt with. But I just absolutely cannot understand the amount of miserable people on social media that think they can be as rude as they like and have no consequences.
Yeah, and I think there's an important message here, actually, for our kids and for younger people. And they've got to be taught not to take social media too seriously. Otherwise, it'll destroy their confidence and make them miserable for the rest of their lives. You've got to take everything on social media with a pinch of salt. You really have.
Nigel, good to talk to you.